Have you ever just stopped and wondered, what makes you you? I mean, really thought about it. Why do you love spicy food when your friend can't stand it? Or why are you a total night owl? What combination of forces shaped your personality, your talents, your little quirks? Well, today, we're going to try and decode our very own blueprint.
Seriously, take a second. Think about your patience, or maybe your lack of it. Your artistic ability, your knack for telling a good story. Are those things you picked up along the way? Or were they kind of written into your code from the very beginning? This question, why you are the way you are, it's probably one of the biggest puzzles of being human.
Okay, so let's get into it. The scientific field that actually takes on these huge questions is called behavior genetics. And really, its whole mission is to untangle that super complex relationship between our genes, our nature, and our life experiences. You know, our nurture.
What's so fascinating is how they even approach this. It's not just about one thing. Behavior genetics looks at our built-in genetic predispositions, tries to separate them from behaviors we learn over time, and it also gives us these critical insights into hereditary conditions. It's kind of like scientific detective work on what it means to be human.
So here's the plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that classic debate, nature versus nurture. Then, we'll look at the scientific tools they use to figure it all out. After that, we'll dive into the modern take on our behavioral blueprint, touch on the field's really controversial past and future, and finally, land on why it's just not a simple case of one or the other.
All right, first up, the big one. This isn't just some dry scientific question, right? It's a philosophical one that people have been wrestling with for ages. But today, science is actually giving us some pretty solid answers. And this is the heart of it all. Are we basically a product of our biology, our DNA? Or are we just blank slates, totally sculpted by our environment? That little word versus in the question, that's exactly what behavior genetics has been working so hard to challenge and completely redefine.
So, how in the world do scientists separate these two incredibly powerful forces? It's definitely not easy, but they have this really clever and fascinating toolkit they can use.
So you've got three classic methods. There are family studies, where you look for traits that seem to run in families. Then you've got twin studies, which compare different types of twins. And then adoption studies, which are this amazing natural experiment because they separate genetics from the environment right from birth.
Now, twin studies are for sure a cornerstone of the field. And the logic is actually pretty simple, but it's so powerful. Get this, identical twins are, well, genetic copies. Fraternal twins are just like any other siblings, sharing about half their genes. So if a trait, let's say extroversion, is way more similar in identical twins than it is in fraternal twins, that's really strong evidence for a genetic influence.
So what have decades of all this research actually found? Well, for a lot of complex psychological traits, we're talking personality, intelligence, studies are suggesting that about 40 to 60% of the differences we see between people can be traced back to their genetic differences. I mean, think about that. That is a massive finding.
But, and this is a huge but, that does not mean your genes are your destiny. Not even close. The modern understanding is so much more nuanced and honestly way more interesting. It's all about how that blueprint actually gets used.
I absolutely love this analogy. Think of your genes as the first architectural plan for a building. That plan sets the potential, right? How many floors, the general layout. But the final building, that's shaped by the builders, the materials they have, the weather during construction, even the renovations that happen years later. Your environment is constantly editing that genetic draft.
And that blueprint is unbelievably complex. There is no single smart gene. There's no one introvert gene. Instead, our most interesting behaviors are what scientists call polygenic. They're the result of hundreds, maybe even thousands of genes, all working together, each one adding a tiny little piece to the whole picture.
Okay, and this right here, this is the absolute key to understanding the modern view. This chart shows something called gene-environment interaction. You can see how a person might carry genes that give them a higher risk for depression. But that risk, it might just lay dormant unless it gets activated by a stressful environment. It's the combination of the genetic predisposition and the environmental trigger that leads to the outcome.
Now, you absolutely cannot talk about this field without confronting its really complicated and often very troubling history, and also the profound ethical questions it's raising for our future. This timeline gives us a quick flyover. The science really kicks off with Mendel's amazing work. But almost immediately it was steered into a really dark direction by Francis Galton and the whole eugenics movement. The discovery of DNA's structure in the 50s put everything on a modern scientific footing, And now, technologies like CRISPR are forcing us to grapple with all these ideas again.
So what exactly was eugenics? Well, it was a social and political movement, and it was based on this idea of improving the human population through selective breeding. And its history is, to put it very mildly, deeply fraught.
And here's why. The eugenics movement was used to justify just horrific discrimination, racism, and human rights abuses, including things like forced sterilizations. It was all built on a massive oversimplification of how complex traits are actually inherited, and it left this legacy of prejudice that's a really stark warning for scientists today.
And that history just looms over everything as we look to the future. With these incredibly powerful tools like CRISPR that let us edit genes directly, we are facing a whole new wave of ethical questions. I mean, what counts as a disorder that needs to be fixed? Who gets to decide what traits are desirable? These debates are more urgent than they have ever been.
So all of this brings us to the final, and I think the most important conclusion from a century of this research. We have got to throw out that old, simplistic way of framing this debate.
If you take away just one single thing from all this, please let it be this. This is the central finding of modern behavior genetics. It is not a competition. It's not a battle between the two. It is a lifelong, dynamic, and incredibly intricate interaction. At the end of the day, our genes are not our destiny. They're our predispositions. They might make you more likely to be tall, but your nutrition has a huge say in your final height. They might make you more prone to anxiety, but your life experiences will shape how that actually plays out. It's this constant dance between them that makes us who we are.
And this leaves us right on the edge of a new frontier, with a question that's just profound for all of us. For the first time in human history, we are learning not just how to read our genetic blueprint, but how to edit it. The choices we make now won't just define the future of medicine, they're going to force us to ask ourselves, who and what do we want to become?